The following podcast is taken from a live broadcast on Inspire FM.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Friday Night Live. You're listening to Inspire FM, 105.1 FM. This is like Friday Night Live. My name is Zaffar Iqbal. Today is the 6th of September 2019, Friday 6th of September 2019. And if you're listening to the repeat on Saturday, the lines are closed. It's better not to call in with your comments because it's too late. No one will be here to answer your call. Right, okay, it's going to be like every week, an action-packed show today for you. A couple of differences that you'll notice today. We've got proper people of caliber supporting me today. It's not just me rambling on. We have Chris Nicholls. He's the retired principal, or recently retired principal of Sixth Form College, who's co-hosting with me today as well. Hi, Chris.
Good evening. Lovely to be here.
Welcome to Friday Night Live. And also, sometimes a regular co-presenter, Abu Bakr Cooper. He's there. He's a science teacher. Assalamu alaikum, Abu Bakr.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Lovely to be here again.
Excellent, excellent. You always pick the good days to come, you know, when there's action-packed topics to discuss.
I know. It's like each time over the last couple of months, I keep honing in when something interesting is going on with Brexit. And I'm like here and I'm thinking, oh my God, right, it doesn't matter how tired I am, at the end of the week, I'm thinking, God. Yeah.
Excellent, good stuff, good stuff. I think it's looking to be, it's going to be a good show today, inshallah. Okay, so like every week, we have a number of topics we discuss, usually half an hour or an hour long. We do have an hour long topic today. As you might have noticed, there's lots of things happening in our parliament. Lots of people protesting and lots of people sort of arguing over different things. So we do have an hour-long Brexit show from 6:30 to 7:30 today, inshallah. We've got a plethora of talented people who know the ins and outs, professors and doctors from their particular sort of fields of research in universities, etc. I'm sure they're going to give us a really intellectual view as to what is happening in the Parliament. So stay tuned, 6:30 to 7:30, inshallah. That's the Brexit, the latest on Brexit. I'm sure you're probably, well, hopefully you're not sick of it, but we'll try and give you a different view, inshallah. A different view.
Okay, that's a challenge.
Yes, indeed. And also we've got...
I think if there's any single person in the country that truly understands what's going on, that person is completely on their own.
Indeed. There's lots happening, to be honest, and I think there's a couple of people I know who predicted this a year ago. They're saying it's never going to happen, and I was saying, what are you talking about? You know, there was a deadline, right? And deadline passes, and we're going to be out of Europe. And he was right. He was obviously sort of better informed than I was. Okay, at 7:30 as well, we're also going to talk about degrees versus apprenticeships. I know a lot of schools have opened up again and colleges have opened up, and recent intake of colleges and people who are in the second year of college probably thinking about, what should I do? Should I take a degree at university or apprenticeship? And then they're probably thinking about loans and being in debt, etc. So we're going to have a session, inshallah, talking about the various options that are available and pros and cons. And we've got to talk to somebody who's taking the apprenticeship route. So stay tuned. That's at 7:30. But we're going to kick off today with, I guess, a continuing theme of Kashmir, right? So if I'll give you a little bit of a background as to what's happened. So as you know, last month, beginning of last month, India unilaterally annexed the semi-independent state of Kashmir. Semi-independent, I say, because it's unfinished business since 1947. Kashmir has a semi-independent status on both sides. It's partitioned between Pakistan and India. So there's a section of Kashmir in Pakistan and a section of it is in India. The one on the Indian side, the population is unhappy with Indian rule, and the intended outcome should have been a referendum which was promised in 1947 as part of the partition deal, and that remains unfulfilled till this day. So instead of fulfilling that particular promise at the UN, India has unilaterally decided to annex Kashmir and split it into two regions, the Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir region, and at the moment is controlled, run directly from the center in Delhi. Now, obviously, the response of the community within Kashmir has been quite intense, I guess. They've opposed this, and they have been opposing this for a good number of years. So there has been a complete security lockdown. So the states of Ladakh, Jammu and Kashmir are in a state of lockdown, a state of siege, effectively for over a month. And there are sporadic, basically, reports coming from there, reported in the likes of New York Times, which seems to indicate that the life is very difficult there with the siege, with basic necessities becoming unavailable by the day in terms of medicines and food, etc. And there are indications that there are abuses of human rights taking place as well. Again, sporadic reports. There is a total communications lockdown, so it's very difficult to find out what's happening in that region. And I guess also in sympathy with those people, there is obviously a large Kashmiri community in Luton and within UK. And they have obviously raised their voices at the various forums, through political means, through protests, through I guess by other means. They have been trying to sort of raise voices of concern, A, at the humanitarian crisis that's looming, and B, about the political situation in terms of the annexation of that region. So we have somebody who's on the line. So obviously what happened this week was, and we're going to try and get some more details, that a cross-section of the community organizations, political mosques, non-political organizations have got together, and there was a march last Tuesday, which there was a sizable turnout, I'm told, and there was protests outside the UK Parliament and also outside the Indian High Commission. So we're going to get an update from somebody who was at the protest a bit later on. But we also got somebody on the line who's trying a slightly different route. We have Naeem Sattar who's on the line, and he's got a petition going to try and get a question in the Houses of Parliament to again raise some concern. Assalamu alaikum, Naeem. Are you on the line? Can you hear me?
Walaikum salam, brother Rasul. Yes, I'm here. How are you?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Welcome to Friday Night Live.
Thank you, Jazakallah, for having me.
So I've just given a quick intro as to what's been happening so far. I know there's been lots of protests. I think there's pretty much protest every week in London in support of the Kashmiris. But you have instigated a petition, which I guess if you want to explain the reasons why you want to go down that route rather than perhaps the protests, etc.
Yeah, sure. Let me give a bit of background. So, like everybody, when this information or this news hit the airwaves, hit the social media, hit everything, in terms of India taking this unilateral decision to downgrade Kashmir and remove rights of the Kashmiris. The biggest right they removed was their right to have a referendum and a plebiscite, which has been promised to them since 1947. And I can cover that a little later on. But more importantly, we needed to do something. And our approach was, well, hang on a second, there's two or three concerns that we had. Number one, this is still a mess that's not been cleared up by the legacy of the British Empire. That's what this is. This is still the remnants of partition, and the British are really need to be involved, right? They need to be involved in this. So us being British citizens, we've got to use the structures here, the methods here, to try and raise this matter at the highest international level.
Sure.
Now, if you remember, initially Pakistan was trying to raise this with UN, and they did, but the voices coming through everywhere, well, this is a bilateral issue. This is just between India and Pakistan.
Sure.
And technically, based upon the similar agreement from 1971, that was the position. That's where things were left off. But that was 1971. We're now 2019. That's 40 years on, and these two countries still haven't sorted this mess out. Okay?
Okay.
And the reason they can't sort this mess out is because actually Britain and the international community need to also be involved.
Sure.
So what we decided to do is that what can we do? So we decided to put a petition together at the British Parliament, and that was organised middle of August, but it didn't take them. It took them almost 3 weeks to actually get it online. So alhamdulillah, we've got it online now, and it's now doing the rounds in social media and everybody's phones and emails and whatever. And I'll encourage everybody to participate and to log their vote and to support this petition.
Sure.
And you can find it on the petition.parliament.uk website, petition.parliament.uk website. And if you just type in on search for Kashmir, you'll find our petition there, which is quoted as saying, table Kashmir issue before the UN Security Council as an urgent threat to peace. Mm-hmm. So our background, our kind of psyche behind this was that, okay, there's two major issues here. Mm. The first issue is that these are two nuclear-armed nations. Yeah. Okay? It's not just a threat to peace in the region, it's a threat to peace worldwide.
Sure.
Number two is that the human rights violations taking place out there, which have been independently verified now by the UN Human Rights Commission. They've actually confirmed, with the little information that's coming out, they've confirmed a number of human rights violations. You know, we all know about the internet blockade. We all know about there's no communications coming out. But there are other things happening, such as, arbitrary detention. There's punishment and imprisonment of political dissidents. There's extrajudicial killings and severe injuries. Mm-hmm. And this has all been reported by United Nations. It's independently verified. And this hasn't just been happening now, Zaffar. This has been going on for years. Yeah. It's been going on for years. I mean, and so we decided, okay, there's two areas. Number one, we don't want a war. Nobody wants a war, sure. Okay? Number two is there needs to be a huge outcry with the human rights violations going on out there, okay? This is unlawful. Mm-hmm. And what makes it worse is that the Indian government enacted a new power called the Armed Forces Special Power Act a few years ago, yeah, which basically gives the Indian Army complete impunity. They can do what they want. Mm-hmm. They can do what they want, and no one can say a thing. So, these are the things going on out there. And what we wanted to do by launching this petition, it allows us to give this very important threat to world peace a platform, because it will be debated in Parliament if we get to 100,000 signatures. Right. So a lot of the times people say, well, what can we do? We all feel for what's going on out there. Sure. But here is a chance for everybody now to do something. You can sign this petition, and hopefully if we get to 100,000 signatures, we will get this thing debated in Parliament. Mm-hmm.
But I guess that there will be detractors who say, what's the point? I mean, there have been a few questions about Kashmir already. What difference is this going to make?
Well, I think the difference is, good question, I think the difference is that we live in a different era now. Information does come out. We have social media that is a platform where people can see what's going on, and there is there's little but some credible information coming out of that region. Sure. But the most important thing is that you've got two nuclear-armed nations here, okay? The world has to take this seriously. Britain has to take this seriously. Mm-hmm. And as long as, I think that's the important thing is, as long as the population here, not just Muslims, not just, Pakistanis, but what we're trying to do is that our petition is very broad-reaching. It's about peace, and it's about human rights violations. We're not saying anything other than that. We said this needs to be resolved because there's a threat to war, and there's inhumane tactics being carried out by the authorities in Indian-occupied Kashmir.
Right. Can I ask what particular actions do you think the British government could take? You've talked about debating it, raising awareness, which is always a start, but do you have any ideas of specific action that realistically the British government could take, either on its own or in concert with others?
Yeah, what they can do, under Article 35 of the UN Charter, any country can bring a matter before the United Nations Security Council as a threat to peace. Any member can do that. So that's what we've provided for in our petition. So any country, so the United Kingdom, if it debates in Parliament and if we get a consensus, then we can take this to United Nations to say that this is a threat to peace and this matter needs to be resolved. What happens after that? You know, and I know...
That was my next question.
Nations, yeah, well, you know what United Nations and what they've achieved.
Yeah.
You know, but they achieved results in Bosnia. You know, they've achieved results in Kosovo. So, you know, there are results that they can achieve, but there needs to be the will of first the people in the country. So we have to lobby our parliamentary representatives to look, this is an important issue because there's almost 3 million Britons who trace their ancestry back to India, Pakistan. Right? So this is a concern for us. And it should be a concern for Indian origin people as well, not just us. That, you know, there's a threat to peace there. Okay, it's not about who can win the war and who's got the biggest army and who's got the smallest army and we've got more nukes than you. There's going to be severe damage to two developing countries in the whole of that region. And we can't afford to have that. Simple as that. And we've got to get that case over to our parliamentarians, who then are going to deliver that case at the UN National Assembly.
Indeed. Okay. I mean, so in terms of what you're after with this petition is actually a debate rather than a question in Parliament, right?
Yeah. So what happens if you look at the parliamentary website? When you get to 100,000 signatures, it will be considered for debate in Parliament. Okay. So then that's where we, as the general public, have to get in, write to MPs, tell them, look, there's this petition on. I'm supporting it. I want you to support it, and I want you to raise it at the highest level in the UK Parliament. That's what we've got to do. So that's the bit and that's the easy bit, really, because the hard bit is getting the petition up. So we've done that. Now, your listeners and people around the country have got to start talking to their MPs and say, look, this is really important for me. And you know what, Zaffar? This is an ideal time to do that because, you know, parliamentarians are going to be knocking on your doorstep very soon.
Could be an election soon coming out. Okay, Naeem, I've got another caller I need to give some time to. Perhaps the next question really would be how does one get hold of this petition, really? And that's...
Yeah, very simple. Just go to the... I can send you the link, Zaffar, and you can put it on your Inspire website if you want. But basically, it's just Google parliamentary petitions.
Yeah.
And once you get to the Parliament petition website, you type in Kashmir in the search box, and you'll see... you'll see two petitions. There's another petition for someone for asking for pressure on India to call an end to the blockade.
Sure.
But the main petition is this one, and we're over sort of 7,500 signatures now in just 3 days. So you know we're having an impact, and we need more. We need to get to 100,000.
Okay, sure. Okay, Naeem, you're welcome to stay online, Naeem. I've got Zaffar Khan, who was in our program last week, and he's basically. He was basically in the protests last week, and I just wanted to, this week, I just wanted to get an update. Assalamu alaikum, Zaffar Saab.
Walaikum assalam.
Thank you for joining Friday Night Live. I understand you were at the march on Tuesday, and I just wanted to sort of get your feedback in terms of what.
Zaffar Saab, I could not participate in the march for some personal reasons.
Okay.
But it was a tremendous march. Yes, it was a tremendous show of solidarity by the Kashmiris and their supporters in this country on Tuesday.
Right. And have you got any information in terms of what I guess what the outcome you expect from the march? Was it seen as a positive thing? Did it send a message, or
Yes. I think this march was a very successful march. It showed the unity of the community, and it also showed that the Kashmiri people were very serious, and they wanted to express their disgust at the way that their country has been disintegrated and annexed by India against international law and against all the other existing principles.
And you say it's a show of unity. This was organised by a plethora of different organisations, right? It was organised by, I guess, the mosques participated in this as well.
This march was organised by people throughout Britain. In this town, mosques were mobilized, ulama were mobilized, ordinary people were mobilized, and so it was that was a very positive aspect of this march, because the organizers also were a collective of political groups who engaged with all sections of Muslim and Pakistani Kashmiri community in particular, and so in all it was a march that was a very unified expression of the Kashmiris and their supporters in this country.
And of course, I mean, you being an activist for the Kashmiris, hailing from Kashmir, what do you think is the momentum still there to continue and hold more marches?
Oh yes, of course. I think we've had two very big, large marches. This one again, independent media reports are saying that there were perhaps as many as 15,000 people. Sure. Also on 15th of August, perhaps a similar number of people. So these are really substantial marches, substantial demonstrations. Other smaller demonstrations have taken up and down this country, involving people in their hundreds. In this town, in fact, 1,500 people a couple of weeks ago. In places like Birmingham, Bradford, Manchester, Wakefield, Rochdale, Oldham this Saturday, tomorrow, and lots and lots of people coming out at sort of local levels. And I think there is room for marches and demonstrations, but also other alternative kind of engagement and activism by the Kashmiris and their supporters in this country. And I think there is a lot of momentum out there, and the people need to actually just to seize on that.
Mm. And I guess I think you, name's on the call as well, and he's started a petition basically calling for United Nations intervention. So I guess from yourself, from you being an activist in this particular field, what other avenues are being explored in order to basically...
I think this petition is a good idea, and you get 100,000 as I heard your contributor towards the end, Naeem, and 100,000, and you'll get a debate in the House of Commons. That is a wonderful thing to do, and of course you need to engage at the government level, at the parliamentary level as well, and that we are doing, and we need to continue that. We need to actually ensure and put pressure on the British government, and the British government is wanting in terms of its responses here. British government has not done as much as it is supposed to do as a permanent member of the Security Council, and the fact that there are 3 million South Asians here who have a direct interest in peace and justice, and there are a million Kashmiris here who have a direct interest.
Sure.
Zaffar, can I just come in there? What brother's saying is actually really, really relevant. Mm-hmm. That this is a legacy from the British Empire, and in particular, it was Lord Mountbatten. Mm-hmm. Lord Mountbatten, in his letter to the to Maharaja Sahib, to the Maharaja of the Princely State of Kashmir, he says that this needs to be decided by the people. Mm. It was in his letter dated 27th of October 1947. Yeah. Okay, so this has never been done. Right, and it was Lord Mountbatten that made this commitment, and on that basis it acceded to India.
Yeah.
And really, we need to take this back to the British government. And that's why the brother on the your colleague at the
Zaffar
protest, Zaffar Khan Sahab, मैं आपसे कहूँगा get whatever your networks are that are involved in the protest. If you had 15,000 people, 20,000 people, whatever, please get them to sign this petition, because we need to get to 100,000 signatures, and that should not be a problem if there's, circa 1 million, 2 million Muslims in this country. It should not be a problem.
I'm gonna have to draw the discussion to a close. I'm just running out of time now, so I want to thank you both, Naeem and Zaffar Sahab, for coming on short notice.
Okay,
thank you for your contribution. Jazakallah.
Thank you very much. I'm actually in a sort of meeting that is talking about Kashmir.
Okay,
so thank you. Okay,
okay.
Bye.
All right, listeners. Okay, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back after these short messages. Stay tuned for the Brexit discussion.
You're listening to an Inspire FM podcast, making available our popular programs from our daily broadcast on Inspire FM.
Welcome back. You're listening to Inspire FM 105.1 FM. This is Friday Night Live. My name is Zaffar. And with me in the studio today, co-presenting is Abu Bakr Cooper and Chris Nicholls, recently retired principal of Sixth Form College. We're honoured to have people of such high calibre today with us today. And we're hoping that the discussion is going to be equally of high calibre. We hope so, inshallah. So the next topic of discussion is... Well, it's Brexit, actually. You can't escape it, can you? I mean, every news outlet you can think about is talking about Brexit. I'm not sure people...
Our complete lack of government. Because we don't... We have someone that is occupying 10 Downing Street who doesn't actually have to pay rent, but he's not actually running the government. The government isn't the government anymore. That's
and
because
that's part...
since he's supposedly taken charge, each vote that he has been master of, should I say, he's lost.
Indeed.
And Parliament has taken control of government.
So I think
the government is not actually governing.
Remember, Theresa May wasn't in control either, so this goes back a while now, this failure of government, breakdown of the system.
So am I right in thinking that now it's actually a minority government with his brother leaving?
Well, it was a minority government during his very first speech, because one of the MPs stood up during his speech
and
very pointedly walked across the House and sat with the Liberal Democrats, and that was his majority went within literally minutes of him starting in the House of Commons.
Wow.
It's pretty spectacular.
We're hoping to get we're talking about basically what's been happening recently, so I think we're hoping to get a full spectrum.
If ever you could have a dagger in the back, would you have ever anticipated it would be such a quiet, silent dagger of your brother just quietly leaving?
Well, I have a theory on that, and we'll discuss it a little bit later. I think it was a question of whether the brother sacked him or he basically resigned, isn't it? It's one of those things, isn't it? Because he was one of the MPs, right? Was down to be,
if Jeffrey Archer had written this into any one of his books, if the listeners don't know, Jeffrey Archer is a Lord Archer, as he is now, is a previous Conservative MP. And in his later years, he started writing novels, and he became extremely successful. If listeners don't know, if Lord Archer had written this in one of his novels, something going on like this, you seriously, I am not kidding. No one would have believed it if this was a script in a play or in a movie or a chapter in a book. that this would be happening to the Prime Minister, and I mean, it beggars belief. Honestly, I really don't.
Right. Okay. I've got a couple of guests on. Right. I think I want to give a little bit of a broader background, right, onto the topic. I know we started talking about the very recent events. Yeah. But I just want to basically recap on what's happened during the week. But staying, I guess, with the theme of what's happening currently, I've got Catherine Rowett, who's an MEP for the Green Party, on the line. Catherine, welcome to Inspire FM Friday Night Live. Can you hear me?
Hello, it's nice to be with you.
Yes, and I understand you're outside Parliament and you're protesting about something.
Yeah, I've been outside Parliament. I'm now actually on the train heading back home again.
Okay, can you tell us what that was about?
There's been a gathering outside Parliament to defend our parliamentary democracy every day this week.
Yeah,
and this is people who are concerned about the fact that Boris Johnson has tried to silence the voice of our representatives by suspending Parliament for 5 weeks at a time of national crisis. So we're particularly concerned that this was not the moment for MPs to be denied a chance to debate and to make decisions.
Right, and I think that there's been protests every day, haven't there, this week, in terms of...
There have been protests every day, yes. This is the only time I've been able to get there this week because, obviously, I was in Brussels for most of the week, but I got back late yesterday evening, and I've been down at the arms fair campaigning against the arms trade in East London this morning.
Catherine, can I ask what your view is on the outcomes of the legal cases, the ruling that it's not unlawful for the Prime Minister to have prorogued Parliament for the 5 weeks?
Well, I can see that, sort of on the technicalities of the Constitution, the Prime Minister can prorogue Parliament when he thinks that he needs to have a new Queen's speech. So naturally, some of the legal challenges would come up with the result that this is something that Prime Ministers have the right to do. They can ask the Queen to do it, and it's normal for the Queen to agree to do it. The problem in this case is that it doesn't appear at all that it was intended to be the normal kind of thing. But rather that it was timed precisely because he didn't want Parliament to have any say about how we should leave the European Union.
So you're not particularly surprised at the outcome then in terms of the legal judgment?
I'm not particularly surprised at the outcome of those legal challenges. I think there are some more in the process, if I understand it rightly. So, that's not the end of the story. But in any case, the fact remains that it's the most irresponsible act of a Prime Minister who has no consideration for democracy, because Parliament is there to make careful decisions and to scrutinise the options before them.
Do you think these protests are going to make any difference, to be honest? Because I think the way things are going at the moment, the way things are, really heated up, and there's polarisation, I guess. Is anybody going to look at the protests at all?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah,
it's a very noisy patch.
Yeah, I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
Are protests going to make any difference?
So it's fortunate that the Parliament has been able to do some damage limitation this week and legislate to prevent the Prime Minister from taking us out of the European Union without a deal, because that means that we shall have to have further discussion of what kind of relationship with the EU we want to have in the future. The crucial thing was to make sure that he didn't do something drastic without scrutiny.
Do you think we're looking at the return of something very close to Theresa May's original deal?
Well, I mean, obviously that's one of the deals. That was the deal that the Conservatives worked out, and that seems to be what Conservatives thought they wanted, though not all of them wanted it, and many people don't want it. The Labour Party thinks that they might try some different kind of deal. I think it's highly likely that there is no deal that you can even imagine that would actually be successful and deliver the kind of Brexit that people were hoping for. So
it depends which people, doesn't it? That's the point. Yeah.
You know, some people might be hoping for that, but other people were hoping for something completely the opposite. So I think it's very unlikely that it will be at all quick to find something that commands a majority.
Brilliant. Okay. Catherine, we're going to let you go and go home peacefully in your journey home. Thank you very much for your contribution today. I think it's been useful.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you indeed.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. We do also have online is Professor Catherine Barnard, who's Professor of European Union Law at University of Cambridge. Hi, Catherine.
Hi there, how are you?
Good. Thank you very much. Welcome to Friday Night Live. Thank you very much for taking the time out to have a discussion with us today. I wanted to first of all ask an intellectual question, if I may. Just put an intellectual hat on, if I possibly can. I'm not sure I'm capable of, but I'll try. So, prorogue, I mean, the term doesn't really ring a bell in my mind at all. Presumably is some sort of an instrument that was, I guess, made available to Parliament many years ago, but it's used for a different purpose, right?
Yeah, it simply means suspend. And what's special about it, it's part of the royal prerogative. But because we live in a constitutional monarchy, the Queen no longer decides of her own initiative whether to prorogue. She acts on advice of her ministers, and particularly her Prime Minister. Sure. And that's why there was a little trip to Scotland by not least Jacob Rees-Mogg and a couple of others to ask the Queen to formally prorogue Parliament. Now, at one level, prorogue just means suspend, and it happens every year.
Yes.
Apart from last year, when we had a 2-year Parliament, but generally it happens every year, and it just means that one parliamentary session comes to an end, there's a Queen's speech, it resets the clock, and another parliamentary session starts.
Okay, and that...
unusual...
Sorry, go on.
Is that this time it's for 5 weeks. Usually it's for a matter of a few days.
Right, okay.
And what the consternation is this time, it's because it's a matter of 5 weeks, not just 3 or 4 days.
Right, okay. And I did read somewhere that particular instrument is used for things like party conferences and stuff like that to allow Parliament to carry on and be suspended for a little bit, but for the members to have go off on conferences. Is that right? Or
no, actually, that's not quite right. It's very easy to be confused over this because they happen at the same time. But that would be going into recess.
Okay.
But the big difference between recess, i.e. what you and I might call a break, and prorogation, suspension, is that recess the MPs vote on, and they vote on the length of their holiday or their break.
Right.
And it was thought that this year they would vote for a short recess so that they could have a short period of time off for the party conference season. However, in the case of prorogation of Parliament, i.e. suspension of Parliament, MPs don't vote on it. It's a matter for the Queen acting on advice of her ministers.
Okay. All right.
And that's been the whole issue, because this whole way of doing things is completely unprecedented, because it has happened in the time where things should be being debated, and the checks and balances which Parliament itself has. And this is the word sovereign literally means rule, but our system is that Parliament is sovereign. Literally in terms of the legislature. So without Parliament being allowed to sit, which they're not allowed to sit when the Queen or the monarch suspends it, they cannot put their checks and balances in place. And this is what the issue is about the length of time that it's been completely suspended for. And I mean, if you try to dress a wolf up in sheep's clothing, it's a wolf.
Well,
and this is the situation here. It is so clear what has been done.
Catherine, can I ask the same question to you that I actually just asked of Catherine Rowett about the outcome of the legal challenges? Do you find it surprising the judgment that it's not unlawful? I mean, what would clearly this is an area of expertise for you. Would you have expected the challenge in the first place, and would you have expected it to have had a reasonable chance of being successful?
I haven't read the judgment itself. I'm not sure it's been published yet, so I don't know exactly its terms. But what I can say is that I'm not at all surprised that there was a challenge, not least because it seems that Gina Miller and her team had been asking the government repeatedly over the summer whether there would be a prorogation, and they'd been told that there would not. But nevertheless, they always suspected it might, and so her team had been preparing for some time. In terms of the outcome, the courts are really reluctant to get involved in what are essentially party political matters. And it's also what's known as a constitutional convention, and the courts are reluctant to rule upon them at all. So I'm not altogether surprised at this outcome. But it's going to the Supreme Court on the 17th, I think, together with the Scottish case. And it will give the Supreme Court a chance to really look into the issue.
And how would you assess its prospects there of a different outcome?
I would suspect that it would. The Supreme Court will also say that they won't uphold Gina Miller's claim. But there is an irony here, and the irony is that Boris Johnson prorogued Parliament. He said, ostensibly so he can get his domestic legislative agenda through. The trouble is, having got rid of so many rebels from the party, it will be almost impossible for him to pass any domestic legislation anyway. And furthermore, having prorogued Parliament, it means that now he's left without a Parliament to do anything in the crucial weeks running up to the European Council meeting on the 17th and 18th of October.
So talk of the Queen's speech and the importance of that is now irrelevant because there's no chance that it would be passed.
And the interesting thing that comes and the interesting thing that comes to mind here as well, Professor Barnard, is that if Mr. Johnson is eventually somehow, by hook or by crook, get himself an election, the big hard hitters of the party, he's just kicked them all out.
And this is a problem now.
The real hard hitters that were there so long, 8% of his parliamentary MPs, the real stalwarts of the party, people like Ken Clarke, father of the house, for goodness sake, the real Tories that people would recognise as Tories, the real, they're not there to help them do the campaign.
Indeed, yes. So I also want to welcome Dr. Alan Wagner. He's an associate research associate in the UK in Changing Europe initiative at King's College London. Welcome, Dr. Alan.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Welcome to Friday Night Live. Thank you for taking the time out to speak to us today. I wanted to perhaps ask yourself in terms of, I know there's been lots of activity in Parliament that's been happening in terms of the bill that was passed, which managed to get through today, through House of Lords. Perhaps if you can just talk us through that a little bit and what the significance of that is, please.
Well, the key thing the bill was trying to do was to ensure that on the 31st of October, the UK will legally be unable to leave the European Union without a deal. So it still gives provision if the UK decides to come to a deal, if it somehow manages to resolve the tensions in Parliament and in the government and with the European Union over a deal. But if not, then the Prime Minister will have to seek an extension. But that leaves Boris Johnson it's left Boris Johnson in a pretty tricky situation. He's now mulling over a series of ways he can try and get round that, because he sees asking for this extension as a real political problem. And I think a lot of people in Westminster now see this as a big problem for Boris Johnson because of the pledge upon which he became leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister was this do or die on the 31st of October pledge. And the possibility of a reopening for for Nigel Farage's Brexit party, which is sort of, the oxygen has been sucked out of Nigel Farage's Brexit party over the last month or so upon the arrival of Boris Johnson. This would give a real opening to Nigel Farage if he wanted to take it. The idea that Boris Johnson has failed in his principal objective as leader of an establishment party of leading the European Union.
No, but I mean, in terms of the effect it has, surely, I mean, you got from somebody who's not too familiar with the politics of the thing. You have a deadline of 31st of October, and then you're meant to do some stuff, right? And if you don't do it by the 31st of October, you're out. Now, what's different here? What's the government got to do simply to stop the date basically rolling on? What have they got to do?
Well, they've really got very, very few options now. Boris Johnson has the opportunity, so he could resign from the government and say, okay, if you want an extension, Jeremy Corbyn, you can do it. I'm not doing it, and then force an election afterwards on this idea that he is Mr. Brexit and he wasn't willing to do the extension. That's a possibility. Although that gives Jeremy Corbyn the keys to 10 Downing Street. And if you're campaigning on the idea that Jeremy Corbyn is a danger in number 10, which is what the Conservative Party will do, they'll be saying, don't give Jeremy Corbyn power in number 10. If they just let him into 10 Downing Street, that'd be a big problem. So he could resign. The other thing is he could just do the extension and abide by the extension. Or he could sort of force a vote of confidence in himself. So he could be a vote in Parliament where he says to Labour, vote me down if you want.
But does that mean does that mean if that's the case? I mean, he either resigns or he's voted out or voted down or whatever. It doesn't automatically give Jeremy Corbyn the reins, does it?
Well, if he literally just resigns, then what the Queen's option is the next best placed person, and Boris Johnson refuses to be Prime Minister, which is, which is within his right. The next best placed person to be Prime Minister, then the Queen calls for, and that is the leader of the opposition. That's Jeremy Corbyn. So even with only 220 seats, nowhere near half the number of seats, he could be Prime Minister. These have happened in the 1920s with the first time first ever Labour Prime Minister had a similar number of seats. So it's a possible scenario that Jeremy Corbyn could be the one that goes to get that extension if Boris Johnson sees that as a more politically advantageous position to be in before an election.
What about the... Sorry, I was just saying, one of the options you didn't suggest was that Boris Johnson might actually agree a deal before the 31st. Do you absolutely rule that out? Do you see there's any prospect of that at all?
You can't rule it out. If you're looking at it objectively, the contours of the deal are changing the big backstop issue, and there's this route to making it only apply the rules that the UK would have to apply to make Ireland not an issue, only applying to Ireland and bringing that back. I can't see Boris Johnson doing that. It's possible. It's possible, but I just don't think that's where the Boris Johnson project is. I don't think that's what the issue, what the direction of travel is. I don't think that's likely, but it is legally possible, and that could be one way to fulfil this legal obligation, actually, to go and...
this is the whole thing, isn't it, Dr. Allen? It's not whether we yes or no have Brexit. It's the issue that they will not, in the Tory party, recognise that it was literally, for all intents and purposes, 50-50, but they will not compromise and say, okay, it was so close, so to keep Parliament and therefore the country and the public and everyone happy, we're going to have to pragmatically start with a softer Brexit, and if we want something more separate in the future, we're going to have to campaign further for it. They want everything now, and the whole thing is, why they call themselves the Conservative and Unionist Party, I really don't know. Because the reality is, this could potentially mean war in the 6 counties again, up and down across the border, and just on that, Just on that, the Tory party should all have stood up to the country and say, for the sake of peace between in Northern Ireland, it's a deal breaker. And why no one is publicly saying this, I really don't know. Because why do they still call themselves Conservative and Unionist? Because they are not upholding the Union. Because loss of peace in the Union in Northern Ireland is breaking this whole deal breaks the provisions of the 1997 Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah, leaving aside whether you think it's sort of right or wrong and what the legalities are of breaking the Good Friday Agreement, it's a big political risk that Boris Johnson is taking, because he's writing off. He's talking about the Union. He's writing off those 13 seats that the Conservative Party has in Scotland. Mm-hmm. They're almost not to all go. Mm. There's big areas, particularly in the south, east, and south west of England, the places that have used to be, have long been Conservative heartland, that are more Remain than average in the country, and that are potentially going to be lost to the Liberal Democrats, which has tripled its share of the vote in the last sort of year, right? So the big gamble is that he can win back seats in the Midlands and the north of England. And that's a big ask, given the deficit he's going to be starting with. Not just losing those 20 MPs this week, but losing those seats in Scotland, changing the whole electoral geography of the Conservative Party. Because they're trying to reshape and redefine what the Conservative Party is, make it a Brexit party, basically. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a really, really pivotal general election that we're going to have very shortly. It's going to be
I mean, I've got to say this: how things are going with the Tory party. Seriously, what are they conserving? Seriously, what do they think they are conserving?
I'm just going to the time, we've got about 30 odd seconds before we go. Just one final thought from yourself, Dr. Allen. We're running short of time. Are we, by all this wranglings, are we not giving a strong hand to the Europeans? They're sitting back and just saying this is not going to happen. We can sit back and do nothing.
Yeah, well, I think in a sense that is right. I don't think there's any deal that is going to be done now until the 31st of October. I think it's the problem is, though, that I don't think there was ever going to be any deal done. I mean, so the logical...
Dr. Allen, I'm going to have to say thank you today. Run out of time completely.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Allen, for another session. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you. Right, listeners, we'll be back after this short break.
Assalamu alaikum, this is Atif Nawaz and you're listening to an Inspire FM podcast.
Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. You're listening to Inspire FM Friday Night Live. This is Zaffar Iqbal. We were discussing Brexit before the break. I do have with me today co-presenting Dr. Abu Bakr Cooper and also Chris Nicholls, the recently retired head from Sixth Form College. And we were talking to Dr. Allen and we were just talking about two technical terms. Well, we talked about proroguing, what that meant, and we also talked about basically the parliamentary bill that was passed to actually hand over control to Parliament instead. So we had Dr. Allen talking about that. We're going to carry on with this topic of discussion for the next half hour or so. We've also got, obviously, some more talented guests that we can talk to. But in the meantime, we're going to have a little bit of a discussion, I guess, between ourselves in terms of the timetable. And we were talking in the break about the fact that, you know, the Tory leadership elections took forever, as we were saying, took about a month and a half or so. And yet now we're fighting for the odd few days to come to an agreement.
I've always said to my mother, because she's very interested in politics, and we talk about things a lot. And I said to her the whole time with this, that this has never been about Brexit. This has only ever been about the Tory party and its direction and what they want to do. And we heard throughout of all of the stagnation with Prime Minister May that, they wanted a leadership thing, and they didn't do it, What was the first thing that happened as soon as they got a 6-month extension from the EU? bang, a leadership contest.
Indeed.
This, if you stop and look at it pragmatically, I personally believe from observation that what the Tory party from their actions literally believe is that the good of the country literally is the Tory party. The good of the country literally is what the Tory party decides, and the Tory party's survival. Everything about how Theresa May's deal was tried to get through and designed and agreed to by her was about holding together the fractions in her own party. That was what that whole deal was about. And the reason why it can't get support and nothing changes, okay, just as one of their own MPs stood up before he crossed over to the opposition benches when he defected, it's his own party that refuses to compromise. We don't have a united opinion towards a harsh Brexit. Half the country wanted to leave. You know, we're only quibbling over a 2% swing. Half of the country want to sway. Pragmatically, and this is what politicians do, you compromise. That's what politics is, finding the middle ground. But they won't do it. And it's tearing their party apart. The Tory party, which traditionally, as Chris and I were chatting before we were coming on here, what was it you said, Chris? You would traditionally you would look at the Tory party. What was the phrase?
Well, the one thing that they were always being supremely good at is hanging on to power. That's And I said traditionally, and I traditionally said you could whether you agreed with their politics or not, you would see the Tory party like the large oak tree in a gale, in a storm. It would sway a little bit, but it would stand strong. It would be something there that was dependable. Whether you agreed with their policies and politics or not, it would be there as something dependable. There is no dependency here. This is literally, well, you can't say that it hasn't literally torn the Tory party apart. The Tory party is not a Tory party. The big hitters, ministers, for goodness sake, Mr. Hammond, he was the Chancellor a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
He's now been kicked out of the entire party. Ken Clarke, the father of the House, listeners, that means he is the most senior, long-standing male politician of the House of Commons. That's what that means when they say father of the House. And he's just been kicked out of the Tory party. This whole business is about the Tory party. It's not about what's right for the country.
So, sorry.
Yeah, there's a question that I have, really. I'd be interested in your views, but also perhaps the next guest.
I do have Professor Colin Talbot on the line as well. If I can welcome him. He's the former Professor of Government at the University of Manchester, Research Associate at the University of Cambridge and Co-Director of Cambridge Policy Labs. Welcome, Dr. Colin Talbot.
Hello there.
Welcome to Inspire FM and Friday Night Live. Thank you for taking the time out and speaking to us today. We are talking about Brexit, and we were talking about the fact that there appears to be some issues around the amount of time left before the 31st of October. And we did have a discussion around the fact that it took a long time for the Tory party elections to take place, and perhaps that time could have been better spent in coming up with some sort of an agreement, right, with the Europeans. Your views on that?
Well, this is the second time that's happened. If you remember, we had a a general election while we had the Article 20, the first 24 months.
Of course, yeah. We've had so many elections, it's hard to remember which one we're talking about now, isn't it?
Yeah.
So many polls, sorry.
Election, when we had the main 2-year period, and then when we got the 6-month extension, we had a Tory leadership election. So they've not exactly been hurrying themselves along. And if you remember, actually, it was a very long time before the May government got around to putting any proposals to the EU about exactly what we wanted from Brexit in terms of a withdrawal agreement and a future relationship.
Yeah, it was a big mistake there, was triggering Article 50 without a plan. But the question I have, and I'd be interested in your view, what I see during this very prolonged period is what seems to be a hardening of public opinion. Maybe it's apathy or just a simple hardening of views, but I find it alarming that opinion polls are suggesting that getting on for 40% of the British public would now support a no-deal Brexit. It's something like even 20% of Remainers, and it's over 75% of Leavers support a no-deal Brexit, which seems very different from 2 or 3 years ago when we were talking about soft Brexits, customs unions, and free trade areas. Why do you think that's happened, and should we be alarmed?
Well, I'm a bit sceptical about how far that has happened. I mean, the opinion polls are all over the place, depending on which one you look at, and a lot has to do with the way in which the questions are actually framed. I also think, to be honest, that the vast majority of the public don't know what no-deal Brexit means. There's been some evidence that people who say, they'd be happy with a no-deal Brexit, they think that means that we just sort of carry on outside of the EU but with the same relationship. So I'm very sceptical about how much of a hardening of attitude there has been. I think there is clearly a large minority of the population that want us out, whatever the cost. And a segment of those are inside the Conservative Party. I mean, some of the views of Conservative Party members are probably a bit more frightening than the general opinion polls, because they've said that they would perfectly happily accept losing Scotland and Northern Ireland rather than not for Brexit not to happen.
Conservative members, yes, in that poll.
That's what I've been saying. They are not. They are not the Conservative and Unionist Party. So drop the word unionist.
The clue ought to be in the name. It's Conservative. They ought to be about conserving.
Yeah, well, exactly, Professor. What I said this earlier. What are they conserving?
No, and they've become an extremely radical ideological party fixated on this issue of Brexit, which, frankly, 3 or 4 years ago, well, before the David Cameron made the decision to have the referendum, the EU was very, if you did polls on what were people's primary concerns, the EU was barely in the top 10 of issues. It wasn't really something that most people were exercised about. So it's come to the fore now, obviously, to the point now where it's completely realigning British politics.
Can I ask you to predict 5-10 years' time? What do you think the long-term impact of all this will be on our party system, on parliamentary democracy, on any aspect of the constitution that you'd like to talk about?
Well, let's deal with the parties first of all. I think the two main political parties, the two main national parties, Labour and the Conservatives, have been in long-term decline before 2017. I mean, from the high point in 1951, when they got over 90% of the vote between them, down to the 2015 election, where they were down to barely over half the vote between them, about 60%. So they've been in long-term decline in terms of support and certainly loyalty of voters. The days when people used to joke about them weighing the Labour vote or the Conservative vote in certain constituencies rather than bothering to count it because they were so solid, have long gone. There are very few areas now where you've got that sort of loyalty to the two main parties. And 2017 was a sort of a blip in which we went back up to just over 80% voting for the two main parties. But that was a polarising effect of Brexit, and it's quite clear that a large chunk of the Labour vote, for example, when Labour got about 40% in 2017, was Remain voters going from the Lib Dems and the Greens, and even some Tories, to vote Labour. Labour's lost, most of the polling evidence now suggests Labour's lost about 10% of that 40%, about a quarter of it, has gone to the Liberal Democrats. and about another 5% has gone to the Brexit Party. So Labour's down, and usually average polling now is around about 25% compared to 40% at the time of the 2017 election. And a similar thing's happened to the Conservative Party. They've lost a large chunk of their votes to the Brexit Party, and they're down on 33, 34, 35%. Sometimes a bit lower than that, which is nothing like they were on 42% of the 2017 election.
So will we ever have a majority government again?
Are in historic decline, and my guess is we're going to see a major realignment. I mean, the last time this happened was just over 100 years ago, when the Liberal Party was replaced by the Labour Party as the main other national party, and I think we're in a similar sort of period now. But I don't think it's going to be a swap between who the major parties are. I think we're going to see 3-4 party politics in England and 4.5-5 party politics in Scotland and Wales.
That's a good thing, though, isn't it?
Well, it would reflect more what tends to happen in most democratic countries. I mean, most most mature democracies have multi-party systems. The system where you only have two major parties that we have in the UK and the USA, Australia, not even Canada now has two major parties all of the time. There's been some quite huge shifts there. So it's pretty unusual to just have two parties like this, and it's been happening in other countries. So France, for example, it did for a very long time have a two-party system. That's crumbled almost completely.
And a multi-party system would suggest a move away from first past the post, then, wouldn't it, to proportional representation?
Absolutely. And first past the post is incredibly ill-suited to a multi-party system. I mean, just to give you an example, in 1992, in the general election in 1992, there was in one of the Scottish constituencies, there was a four-way split between the Liberal Democrats, the SNP, Labour and the Conservatives, who all got roughly a quarter of the vote each. And the Liberal Democrat was elected on 26% of the vote in that constituency. So 74% of the people in that constituency didn't get the person.
Ignored completely.
That's a good example.
Can I just ask you to explain a little bit more about, I know it's probably not necessarily going to be the outcome, but what does no-deal Brexit hold for us then, if that is the...
Well, there is no such thing as a no-deal Brexit. I mean, we can leave the European Union without a deal.
Yeah.
We will immediately have to negotiate a whole series of deals. People think the EU membership is just about trade, but of course it's not. It's about a whole host of other things.
Sure.
I mean, just to give you one example, the airline industry, my eldest stepson's an airline pilot. He's based in Paris. He's English. He's married to a French woman. They've got a kid. His airline licence was based in Britain. He's had to consider shifting that to register in a European country. Sure. His company's aeroplanes fly from a company which was based in the UK and has had to relocate its headquarters to Holland. His residency status in France will be in question. None of those things have anything to do with the trading relationship with the EU. And there's a whole host of things like that around security and other forms of cooperation which we will have to negotiate deals about. So there's no way we can live as a sort of in splendid isolation off the coast of France and Holland without those sorts of relationships, never mind the importance of the economic relationship.
And that presumably is one of these long-term things, that these things will be discussed and agreed individually between UK and individual countries over the number of years, I guess.
Well, they would have to be, all of those things would have to be agreed with the EU because they're all governed by the EU structures and institutions, so we couldn't negotiate bilateral agreements with France.
But you would have thought a lot of these would have been discussed so far and they've been agreed on.
No, they haven't.
They haven't at all.
They were discussed to some extent in the withdrawal agreement.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things everybody focuses about the withdrawal agreement, about this Irish backstop issue, which is incredibly important and everybody ignored before the referendum. But there's a whole host of other things in the backstop agreement. That's why it's 600 odd pages or whatever it is, covering a whole range of things from medical devices through to airline regulation, security cooperation, policing cooperation, European arrest warrant, loads and loads of different things which are covered by it. All of those go out the window if we leave without any sort of withdrawal agreement, and we'd have to go back to square one and start renegotiating them all over again.
And interestingly,
and on the trade agreement bit, I mean, nobody who knows anything about trade agreements believes that we could negotiate a fresh trading arrangement with the EU in anything under about 3, 4, 5 years. It would take, and in the meantime, there'll be huge economic dislocation as a result of leaving without a deal.
And that, of course, is going to have an impact on people's livelihoods and jobs, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've had 40 years of increasingly integrated European economies and businesses and just-in-time deliveries for components in things like the car industry. Ironically enough, all of that was accelerated by the introduction of the single market, which Margaret Thatcher was the driving force behind. It was Britain that pushed for the single market integration. As soon as you pull that apart, it caused huge economic dislocation.
And this is supposed to be about getting back sovereignty or increasing our own sovereignty, and yet listening to you talking about how everything will have to be negotiated with Europe, 27 countries against one, it sounds like there's a significant loss of sovereignty coming up.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a myth about national sovereignty in a globalised and interdependent world where we rely on imports and exports of all sorts of goods and services, and people want to travel and live and work in different places. It's impossible to be completely sovereign and independent. You have to come to all sorts of trade agreements with other people. I mean, one of the ironies is that the hard Brexiteers keep saying, "Oh, well, we can retreat to trading on World Trade Organization rules." Well, the World Trade Organization is just another way of sharing sovereignty between countries, because agreements made through the World Trade Organizations are compromises about the rules under which trade is governed, and it's no different from the EU in that respect. It's not as powerful as the EU, and it's not as integrated as the EU, but it's just another way of sharing sovereignty between countries.
But the agreement that has been drafted so far, which bit of it is basically contentious, and which bit of it is the one that's causing lots of divisions in Parliament?
Well, it would depend who you ask. I mean, for the majority of the Conservative, the argument's been primarily around this Irish backstop issue. Right. Which, frankly, I follow this stuff in detail, and I still don't really understand what their objection is. If, as they say, it's relatively easy to put in alternative arrangements for the Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland border.
Yeah, why are they worried about the backstop?
Would never come into play. So why are they so worried about it? What's the problem?
Yeah.
So
if they were
that's one issue.
Yeah, if they were so easy to put in place, the backstop. If they really truly believed that these measures that they keep talking about were so easy to put in place, they wouldn't be worried about the backstop, would they?
No, absolutely no. And I mean,
it's a smokescreen, isn't it? It's a smokescreen.
The EU and the Republic of Ireland have been asking for what are these measures for 2 years or more now, and they still haven't come up with anything.
Yeah.
Just keep hearing about trusted trader schemes.
So, I mean, that's the main issue for quite a lot of Tories, I think. But what's interesting is that the ERG, European Research Group wing of the Conservative Party, has been making noises off saying, well, it's not just about the backstop, there's a lot of other things that are wrong with the withdrawal agreement. I mean, they don't like the withdrawal agreement at all, full stop, but mainly because, just to be clear for your listeners what the withdrawal agreement is, the withdrawal agreement is basically the divorce settlement with the EU. It's what do we pay them, how long is it before we move out of the house? Yeah. How do you divide up the CD collection, if anybody's got CDs? All of those sorts of things. But it lasts for 2 years, and for that 2 years, everything stands still. So we remain part of the customs union, we remain part of the single market, we remain part of all the other institutions like the European Medicines Agency and so on and so forth. And then at the end of that 2 years, we're supposed to have negotiated what the final arrangement would be. So the argument at the moment is largely about what happens for that 2 years. There's hardly any discussion at all of what happens after that. And I think for the first time this week, when Mr. Frost, the Prime Minister's Sherpa, as they call them, went to Brussels and outlined what they wanted to do, for the first time the British government said, well, what they want is a Canada-style free trade agreement with the EU for the future, which is not what they've said up till now. They've left it very vague up till now.
Right, okay. And what does that imply then? I mean, Canada-style...
Well, the deal with Canada is a deal about only about goods. It's not about services. And 80% of our economic relationship with the EU countries is sale of services. So it would exclude an awful lot of economic activity, wouldn't be included in it. And it's basically just a minimum tariffs arrangement between Canada and the EU. So it would say we would have minimum tariffs with the EU after we'd left. It doesn't deal with, and this is, you may have heard people saying Canada plus plus. Well, the plus plus bits are all the things like security cooperation and arrest warrants and sharing criminal checks and all those sorts of things. I mean, just one thing to point out how idiotic some of this stuff can get. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago, the Home Office announced they were going to tighten up on criminal records checks of people wanting to enter the country from the EU 27 after we'd left on October the 31st. One slight problem with that, if we leave on October the 31st without a deal with the EU, we lose all access to European criminal
records.
So we can't check any of them. So they can make the announcements as much as they like, but they wouldn't have any way of actually implementing it.
Interesting.
Can you see any prospect at all of a deal before the 31st of October?
No. I can't see how... it's impossible to negotiate a reframed withdrawal agreement in the timescale.
Professor, where's the negotiating team? Where's the British negotiating team? He hasn't sent anybody over there.
Really,
there's nobody over there negotiating.
Well, but also, I mean, to be honest, now that a general election is in play, and whatever happens, we're clearly going to have a general election in the next 2 or 3 months. There's no incentive at all for the EU to negotiate anything very much because they don't know who they're going to be dealing with.
Right. Okay, Professor Talbot, well, we're running out of time. It's been really fascinating discussing Brexit with yourself. You've been crystal clear in your responses, and it's been highly entertaining.
Thank you.
Definitely enjoyed it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you,
Professor. Have a lovely weekend.
Okay, listeners, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about something slightly different. We're going to talk about education, and we have the best people to talk about that in the house. Thank you very much. Stay tuned.
You're listening to an Inspire FM podcast, making available our popular programs from our daily broadcast on Inspire FM.
Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. You're listening to Inspire FM Friday Night Live. My name is Zaffar Iqbal. We were talking about Brexit before the break. We had Professor Colin Talbot. I hope I pronounced his name right. It's Talbot. And very, very articulate. And he basically clarified a lot of things that I had basically heard people talk about, but I guess didn't know one way or the other how to form an opinion on that. And I think he was very clear on some of these things. Okay. So we want to move on to a slightly different topic now. We want to talk about education, and we want to talk in particular about, for the benefit of those, I guess, who are thinking about going to university next year, thinking about applying to universities, and whether they're considering degrees at university, the traditional degrees, or now degree apprenticeships. And I think what's the right choice for them. And I also want to talk a little bit about transition from GCSEs to A-levels. I think there's a big gap between GCSEs and A-levels, and I think some students sometimes, find it a little difficult to transition. So we're going to talk about that. So I guess we've got the right people, as I said before the break, on the panel. Some co-presenting. We've got Chris Nicholls, who's the recently retired principal of Sixth Form College. We also have a science teacher, and a former doctor, I have to say, Abu Bakr Cooper, who's with us today, co-paneling. And we're also fortunate to have one of our own, Abdul Qadir. You might have heard his voice on many a show here in Inspire FM. And he's taken a particular route to get his degree. So we're going to try and sort of see, basically get the pros and cons of different options that are available to the youngsters today. If I can go to, Abdul Qadir, if you can talk a little bit about your choice. I think you decided that you want to do a degree apprenticeship.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about, it doesn't sound to me like a proper degree. Perhaps you can talk about what that means.
Sure. So degree apprenticeship, I suppose it's like a normal apprenticeship where you are working and studying at the same time. However, with a degree apprenticeship, you're obviously going to uni. Normally, with this one, you're going to uni once a week, and you're, at the end of it, getting a full degree out of it. And you're getting paid at the same time without having to pay the tuition fees.
Right, okay. So the big plus is that you don't end up with a big debt afterwards.
That sounds like a win-win.
It does sound like a win-win. But I guess if you're going 1 day a week, it's going to probably take you a while to get your degree, right?
No, it's actually pretty much the same time. It's
3 years?
4 years.
4 years, okay.
But with normal degrees, you have the option of taking a placement year. Mm-hmm. With this one, you don't. You're spending those 4 years studying, and basically you're cramming in a week's worth of lectures and content into the 1 day that you're going into uni.
Sounds like hard work.
Oh yeah, it definitely is.
It is. Is it more intensive, do you think, then?
100%. From the very start, I was told, we were told that if uni is like the army, what we're doing is like SAS,
right?
Simply. But yeah, it's 100% tougher. You don't get to relax as normal uni students may be able to. You obviously won't have the uni life that most people want. But at the end of it, I think all of that is worth it.
Yes, because you get to save on probably about 40 grand's worth of debt.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're getting paid at the same time as well. Are you getting paid in your work?
Yep, I am, yeah.
Right, and you're in a company at the moment, so you're
That's
working
right.
4 days a week. You're working 1 day at university.
That's right, yeah.
Right, so where do you get time to study then, homework and stuff?
So homework, normally after work, weekends, or, I'm not too sure whether it's every single workplace, but my workplace is fairly lenient with doing work at work. So if I want to take some time off, maybe book a meeting room or something, they'll allow me to do that.
Right, okay. So
how difficult was it to find a degree apprenticeship? How competitive was it? What did you have to go through to do it?
Well, actually finding a degree apprenticeship was fairly tough. You can't really find that many. However, the strange thing is I was expecting it to be quite competitive for this particular position that I was applying for. It was almost like you were applying for a normal job. You were going through like an interview process and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
However, there were only 12 people at the interview stage. I'm not too sure how many they've eliminated before that through the application stage. However, there were only 12 people, and at the end, 5 or 6 people were selected. So you had 50-50 chance for this particular position, but I can't say for a general
I'm sure there were a lot more than 12 initially applying.
Most likely, yeah.
You did very well there.
What's the nature of the work that you do then, Abdul?
It's networking. Computer science, but specialised in networking.
Right.
So they actually give you're actually working in networking, or is that what you're studying?
Well, okay, so I'm working in networking. I'm in the networking team within the telecommunications team. But with the degree, I'm doing a computer science degree, but I'll be specialised in networking.
Right. But the thing is, I mean, you come straight out of college,
Yep.
And this company trusted you to do a proper job, or is it not a proper job?
It 100% is a proper job. However, obviously you're trained up to be able to work at the same level as your colleagues.
Brilliant. Sounds.
And how does the salary compare with somebody who's doing the job of 5 days, but not doing the apprenticeship? Is there a big difference?
Oh, 100%. There is a big difference, but I'd say that it's a lot higher than what your normal apprenticeship would be like if you're going to college, as well as you have to remember that they're also investing in you for university, so they're paying that $9,000 or so a year plus your normal salary. So I guess it would add up to be roughly normal salary, normal starting wage. So in the end, I'd say it could be about the same.
Right.
I mean, it strikes me that what you've got is the absolute best of both worlds. It's a fantastic opportunity, and you've obviously done really well to get it. You're going to have a degree. You're being paid. You're not having to pay the fees. You're not taking the loan, and you've got a great job. And by the end of the 4 years, not only will you have a degree, but you'll be really experienced and probably already being promoted within the job. I have a question really for most people thinking about apprenticeships. If you think back to the college, back to young people of 17, 18 doing A levels, doing BTECs, and thinking university or apprenticeships, the default position typically in many families, and I know it's a family thing, it's got to be a degree. We don't think apprenticeships is right. What would you say now, from your perspective, to a kind of family where they're having that discussion? What sort of thing would you advise them to think about?
I'd say definitely keep your mind open. I mean, for some people, maybe university is the right choice, depending on what you want to do. However, an apprenticeship or a degree apprenticeship, it gives you that experience to allow you to kind of like segue into maybe some type of field that you want to actually do in the future. If not, then you'll just get experience out of it, which is 100% a bonus. So yeah, definitely keep your options open. And
I love the way you use that as a verb. You segue your way into.
So we're going to be taking a short break shortly for the azan, but I wanted to open up the debate a little bit. So that's all fine and well what you're saying, but it's actually vocational work, isn't it? I mean, if you're kind of like doing a degree in, say, I don't know, politics or history, you're not going to have that option, are you?
I presume not. No, it's very specific to the type of job you want to do, 100%.
Right, okay, so we're going to take a short break in a minute. So I think, Chris, you may be able to come in here. Chris, so it's very specific, and it's the old argument between vocational and academic studies, really, isn't it? Academic studies being, you're being trained to think, you're being educated to think because of the person rather than for a job. Isn't it? Is that still argument relevant, do you reckon?
Oh, it's a hugely important issue, this. It's something that Britain has got wrong consistently since 1945, when, without going back into history, our current education system really traces its roots back to then. And they made an attempt to have a vocational pathway. There's a three-part system, and they've never got it right. And vocational qualifications have always, and FE colleges as part of it, have always been seen as as kind of something for other people's children to do. Second rate, if you're not good enough to go to university, then do a vocational course or do an apprenticeship. And if you look at the experience of other successful European countries, Germany is the one people most often quote, where there's never been that issue about vocational education being something for second-class citizens. That's one of the reasons why they're doing so much better than us in terms of manufacturing, technical kind of professions. So the good news, it's changing. It's changing fast, actually, at the moment, and it's great to hear about. Yeah, we're
going to take a short break for Azan, and we'll be back after this. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. You're listening to Inspire FM. This is Friday Night Live. My name is Zaffar Iqbal. We're discussing education. We're discussing in particular degrees versus degree apprenticeships. Right, okay. So I just wanted to clarify the difference. I think people might get confused between apprenticeships and degree apprenticeships. So we were talking about that in a break, Chris. Perhaps you can explain the potential for misconception here.
Well, I suppose apprenticeships come at different levels. So you can do an apprenticeship at 16 after GCSEs. You could do an apprenticeship after A-levels. You could do an apprenticeship after you've done your degree. The degree apprenticeship is pretty special, as we were saying earlier, where you're actually combining the two, and it's if you can find an opportunity and actually be successful, then you've done really, really well. But the apprenticeships come at those different levels, really. So there's an option of doing them really at any level, really, from 16 onwards.
Right. I want to bring in Sufyan Sadiq. I think his line's dropped. I may have to try him again. But I think we were talking again in a break about people's perceptions and people's view of apprenticeships versus, I guess, a degree. And I think within the Luton community, I think there's a view that a degree is a must, right? And it's something like that. And I think there is an argument for that as well, because I think the parents want to see that children do the best they can, or do the best for them as much as they can. But what you're saying is that there are many options. The routes are open now at the moment.
Yeah, well, the truth is that some people, quite a number of people that go and take a degree, end up in employment that they could have done after A-levels. So, there isn't really sufficient degree level opportunities available. And it's simplistic to say, well, it's things like media. Why? But it isn't about that. It's a lot to do with the individual person. How they network, what opportunities they find for themselves, simply how hard they're prepared to work, I know it's a very old-fashioned thing to say, but it is really important to work hard. And we've heard already about, how tough it is on this degree apprenticeship, but, there's no shortcut to any place worth going to, as they say.
Brilliant. Okay. He's been patiently waiting, Sufyan. Thank you very much. I know you had to cut you off for a little bit. But I guess the question for you is which one would you go for? Which one would you advise? Apprenticeships, degree apprenticeships, or degree? And where is your, I guess, heart set on? Can you hear me, Sufyan?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
Sorry, yes, I can hear you. I think really, in terms of options, as the saying goes, that it's horses for courses. It would vary from each young person, depending on what route they want to take, what career they want to take. So it's very easy. Sometimes I hear people say, when they're giving advice, I wouldn't recommend you doing BTEC, or I wouldn't recommend you going to university, and you should only do a degree apprenticeship, for example, or an apprenticeship. It varies, and I think that's the key thing is there is an element of choice both at post-16 and at higher education. It's about giving young people the right education in terms of their choices, what's out there, what are the options, and which option suits them the best, depending on their skills, their experience, and also what kind of career they want to go into.
I mean, you've given a very sort of careers advisor's view. What would you advise your children?
Well, naturally, I think if you had it depends on, again, the ability. So if my child was academically very able, then I would be pushing for them to do A-levels. And I'm honest, I have these conversations almost daily in the last couple of weeks since the results have come out. And I'm saying to people, if they're 7, 8s and 9s, the typicality across their grades in GCSEs, then A-level is the right route for them. If they're looking for something like medicine, and I'm probably very typical that I can't say that I wouldn't be very happy if my daughter and son decided to be doctors. I'd be over the moon. And therefore I would suggest that they would take the A-level route in that case if they were very academically able. However, we also know that not every child is necessarily a grade 9 student. And therefore the BTEC route, I think, sometimes, and this is my own experience, sometimes families, parents, and even young people see BTEC as almost a negative option.
I think it's almost a swear word, isn't it?
Yeah, it's almost, no, but it is. You're actually right. That's the way some young people use that word as well. It's almost a cuss, so to say, as they say, oh my God, look at you, you're a BTEC. But actually, if you look at the way BTECs have evolved over the last 15 years or so, you can get in. I've had students with BTECs go into Durham University. I've had people go into Queen Mary's and some of the really top universities, SOAS, City. So it's not like BTEC isn't an option. For somebody with a grade 6 or grade 5, as a typicality, actually, the chance of them getting an A star and A-level is quite limited. But the chance of them getting a distinction star at a BTEC is a lot higher, but it carries the same amount of UCAS points. So sometimes I find it very hard, especially when I used to give advice to young people about what to take next. Parents used to be standing there insisting, no, but I want A-levels, I want A-levels. And I'm saying, even though that the young person will only get perhaps D's or C's at best, and then still end up in a university that is quite low down in the rankings as opposed to what they can get into if they had the distinction stars. So it
is changing, though, isn't it, Sufyan? Wouldn't you say that resistance to BTEC I really think it's changed a lot in the last 10 years or so.
And it has indeed. I was head of vocational education at Luton Sixth Form College, and we the exponential growth just in the last 5 years or 6 years. At the moment, I think the college will be sitting at about. They've got over 3,000 young people at the college, and they'll probably have 1,500 plus young people engaged in BTEC qualifications of some sort, vocational qualifications.
But I thought these BTEC qualifications are being reduced, if not phased out, in the new curriculum. No, they're not.
I think what it was changing in terms of when the move from having fully vocational in terms of only coursework based. A lot of the BTECs have been revamped. Some of them they've made a slightly narrower option in terms of how many different BTEC or vocational options are available. There's an examination element that's been brought into a number of the vocational qualifications, and with the technical qualifications, they've got a lot more emphasis on work experience. So that kind of provides it with, perhaps some people would say, a lot more rigor and less room for people who lack integrity to exploit that qualification, which has happened around the country.
Okay. Right, well, I think we're running out of time, Sufyan. Thank you very much for waiting patiently and giving your views on the subject. And Jazakallah for your conversation. For your views. Okay. Just in the last minute or so, Abdul Qadir, perhaps if you wanted to sort of... we did say there are limited options, I guess, in terms of degree apprenticeships. How hard was it for you to find out what you wanted to do and then find something in that field?
So, as I was coming to the end of A-levels at Luton Sixth Form, I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do.
Right.
But it was actually one of the presenters here at Inspire FM that actually advised me to do a degree.
It wasn't me, was it?
No, it wasn't you,
All
unfortunately.
right.
Yeah, so he recommended me to do a degree in which I just thought, is there a degree apprenticeship? Because I never heard of it. So that made me, I started looking for them. It was very hard to find. And I think if you want to...
What are the different options that you explored? I know you settled on one.
Yep. So I wasn't looking for a university route. I wanted either a normal job or an apprenticeship. But then I happened to find a degree apprenticeship.
Right, but the different types of degree apprenticeships out there. So you went for networking and computer studies.
Computer science.
What other ones available you saw?
Honestly, I'm not sure because I was looking just for computer science. Yeah.
And so you're pretty focused on what you want to do. Chris,
can I just decide?
Final words?
Can I just decide why you decided you didn't want to go to university? That's quite unusual.
Mainly cost and the fact that employment isn't guaranteed at the end of it.
That's a very sensible
He's
thing
a very sensible person, isn't he?
Yeah.
And very hard-working as well.
Indeed. Listeners, unfortunately, we've run out of time until next week. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found the discussions useful and entertaining. If you have, come back to us again next week, and perhaps you'll want to phone in and take part. Thank you very much. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We stream our daily broadcast on inspirefm.org. You'll find all our daily updates on our social media at Inspire FM Luton.